Hi there, everyone. Welcome to a special GZERO live stream, Closing the Gap, Digital Tools for Economic Empowerment. I'm JJ Ramberg, the founder of Goodpods and a longtime journalist covering small business and the economy. You've probably heard the phrase, think globally, act locally. It's a mantra for climate change advocates and big private sector companies alike. Today's conversation is a great example of how expanding access to digital tools for individuals and small businesses can truly have a worldwide impact on the economy. We're going to explain to you how crucial digitization is to economic growth and tackle that from a few key angles, including remittances, trade, and the explosion of digital payment options that we've seen since the pandemic began. Our program is brought to you in partnership with Visa, and we have assembled an all-star panel of experts today, so let's get right to it. We begin with Ali Wine, Senior Analyst at Eurasia Group, covering geopolitics, and Ruben Salazar, Global Head of Visa Direct. I'm so happy to talk to both of you. I find this topic incredibly interesting. I could talk for hours, so getting right to it. Ali, I want to start with you. The World Economic Forum estimates that in the next decade, 70% of new value in the global economy will come from digitally enabled businesses. At the same time, more than 3.5 billion people still lack internet access. What does that say to you?
Well, it says three things. Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be talking with you, JJ. It says three things to me right off the bat. Number one, what a stark discrepancy, what a disturbing discrepancy when you have roughly 45% of the world's population who is substantially cut off at the present, substantially cut off from the direction of travel of the global economy. And you said 70% of global economic value over the next decade is going to come from digitally enabled business. So you have roughly 45% of the world's population substantially cut off from the direction of travel of the global economy. So point number one. Point number two, when you have that type of troubling stark discrepancy, it then suggests that there's an urgent imperative. What do we do to narrow the gap? What do we do to narrow the digital gap, increase digital access so that we can bring more of those roughly 3.7 billion folks more and more into the global digital economy? And then the third and last point that I'll make, and just by way of hopefully framing the conversation, I imagine what we're going to be talking about for the next hour or so is we have a troubling discrepancy, we have an urgent imperative, and therefore we have a compelling opportunity. What tools can all of us, whether in government, in the private sector, in the philanthropic sector, what can all of us do to help narrow that gap? So I think that we have a troubling discrepancy, but also an urgent imperative and a compelling opportunity that presents all of us.
I think that's a good way to think about it optimistically here. I want to make one point, though. When we look at the number 3.7 billion people, a lot of people will automatically think that's in the developing world. That's not true.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I think it's important for us to think that, and I imagine that most of those, probably, I would imagine, I don't have the exact numbers on hand, probably I would imagine most of those 3.7 billion are concentrated in countries that we might include in, say, the global south. But to your point, you're absolutely right. Even in many advanced industrial democracies, we have, we're grappling with issues of lack of digital access, lack of access to banking, which we'll be talking about later. So I think you're absolutely right, JJ, that when we talk about that 3.7 billion figure, even though I suspect that the majority probably live or reside in the global south, we shouldn't assume that all of them do. This is very much a global challenge.
Yeah, absolutely not. Ruben, the pandemic accelerated the push to digitization overall. Some of the things that Ali was talking about as an opportunity for us. Give us a sense of where the world is in terms right now of adoption of these tools.
Well, I believe the world is in a completely different stages, but it's regardless if you are in a remote village in Bangladesh or in a highly connected, suburb or neighborhood in any city, the dependency of technology is more acute, is more evident. And during the pandemic, even though the entire industry was in a big transformation in terms of digital adoption, the pandemic accelerated probably 3 to 5 years, this adoption. Let me give you 4 observations. The first one is what Ali was mentioning, the participation of a small business in e-commerce platform is very little today, it's very small. And if you were a restaurant in the middle of the pandemic without digital presence, without an efficient website, you technically need to close. Your operation didn't exist. But if you were a restaurant operating in any food delivery platform, digital platform, you at least have a way to serve your consumers. That's from the seller side. So this is a huge opportunity there. In the buyer side, we saw millions and millions of consumers coming for the first time to make their first online purchase. And it happens in all segments, young population, older segments, etc. And the third, I will say, observation is very close to home. My daughter during the pandemic was a recently graduated unemployed architect, and she was providing freelance work for multiple platforms. But even though she delivered the work in 2 or 3 days, she needs to wait for a check to come in the mail, then go into the bank to deposit the check, and wait for 2 or 3 days for this check to clear. So even though she delivered in 2 days, the fruits of her labor came a month later. No? And there is a huge transformation in terms of wealth creation from content creators, freelancers, independent contractors that are demanding a different payroll system that we don't have today. That digitized significant money flows and cash flows for big segments of the population. The last observation is remittances. It was really, really, really difficult for somebody to, from the send side and the receive side to operate in a cash-to-cash environment. You didn't have the access to go to the bank or the supermarket or the 7-Eleven to deposit the cash if you are a sender, and you didn't have the chance to go and pick up the cash in the other side of the transaction. So all these trends are here to stay, and we are just scratching the surface in terms of digitalization.
And we'll be talking more about remittances in the next block. But I want to put a point on something that we said before as a follow-up, which is you're talking about this acceleration, but still, as we said, more than 3.5 billion people don't even have access to that. If they want to adopt these digital tools, they don't even have internet access. There's no way for them to get to them. Ruben, let's talk about banking. The term unbanked means someone who doesn't have a checking or a savings account, and there are an estimated 1.4 billion unbanked people in the world still, and most of them women, which is sadly not surprising. What are the implications of this?
Well, the implications are that, we call unbanked, underbanked, or underserved to this segment that has little to no access to formal financial instrument. No? And the implications are that it's not only affect, women, but also other minorities, no? Immigrants, refugees, ethnics, and other minorities that, lack the access to the formal banking. The cost for them to create wealth, the cost for them to operate in cash is huge, no? And that creates a vicious cycle that is very difficult to get out from. Any calculation, 1.4 to 1.7 billion individuals out there without banking access, they become victim of alternative methods that end up being really, really expensive for them. So it has a very, a strong impact in the local economy, GDP creation, and some other, effects in the local communities.
And so many social effects. I worked in microfinance for quite a bit of time, and to have all these, particularly women, unbanked causes a lot of ripple effects elsewhere. Yeah, Ali, I just want to go to Ali really quickly. Talk about the geopolitical risk, right? We're talking local becoming global in this kind of divide.
Yeah, absolutely. JJ, just to build on some of the points that Ruben was making, the term unbanked, it kind of has a euphemistic tone. I think it's difficult when you don't have access to a checking account, you don't have access to a savings account, it's difficult to overstate the impact. You're basically cut off from the global economy. You're cut off from your ability to engage in many of the kinds of transactions that all of us on this call here today that we take for granted, that we engage in on a daily basis, or at least on a regular basis. And I want to focus on particular on that 1 billion figure. You mentioned about 1.4 billion people are unbanked, roughly 1 billion of whom are women. 1 billion women, about an eighth of the world's population. And when you have 1/8 of the world's population, I'm just focusing on women who are unbanked, but 1/8 of the world's population who are largely decoupled or cut off from the global economy, the ability to engage in basic transactions for their own just day-to-day sustenance, the geopolitical ramifications are potentially huge. And I want to make just a framing point. It's important to consider these figures, 1.4 billion, 1 billion, 3.7 billion when we were talking about connectivity issues a few minutes ago. against a broader backdrop of a global economy right now that's under severe strain from multiple directions. So we're dealing with the aftershocks of COVID-19. So many countries in the global south that we're going to be discussing this morning, they're still trying to recover from COVID-19. They now have been hit with a double blow with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the externalities in terms of disruptions to energy markets, disruptions to food markets. And so when we talk about the consequences of being unbanked, it's so challenging as it is, but against that broader macroeconomic backdrop, trying to recover from COVID-19, trying to deal with the externalities associated with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that macroeconomic challenge for those who are unbanked is that much more challenging. And of course, when you have that kind of confluence of growth headwinds, the geopolitical risks are popular unrest, social unrest, disillusionment with governments. And we shouldn't understate that risk for disillusionment with governments. When citizens are struggling to engage in economic transactions, struggling to put food on the table, they're dealing with these broader macroeconomic headwinds, they ask governments, what are you doing for me? And if they feel that they're not getting satisfactory answers, we can't understate the potential for significant political unrest.
And I think, Ollie, that's why it's so important for us to be having these discussions to a wide audience, because when you were sitting here in Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., the idea of someone not having a bank account might be so unbelievable or foreign to you to imagine what it's like to not have access like that. All right, Ollie, thank you so much. I'm going to bring you back later in the program. Ruben, you stay with me because our next topic is near and dear to you. You've already brought it up, and it is remittances. And for this conversation, I want to bring in Dilip Ratha, an economist at the World Bank who leads NOMAD, the Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development. Welcome, Dilip. I'm just going to ask you to take yourself off mute.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled that you are here to talk to us. To start off the conversation, if you can just first define remittances for the audience.
Well, remittances are money sent by migrants to their families back home and sometimes to themselves as well. It should be both international remittances as well as within the country remittances, because the number of people who migrate internationally is about 300 million globally. And within the country, internal migration is, number of international migrants is about 750 million. So we are looking at more than 1 billion people as migrants, and then they send money to, I don't know, 1, 2 each. We're talking about then 2 to 3 people out of 7 people in the world as being beneficiaries of remittances.
And you have a personal story with remittances as well. Can you share it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like all migrants, the reason one leaves the home to migrate somewhere is to provide for the family, because otherwise it is difficult to live and provide for the family, get a job and earn money. So in some cases where even if there is money, there are no opportunities like educational opportunities. In my case, it was lack of educational opportunities, plus the fact that once you get educated, there isn't a job there back home in a village where I grew up. When I grew up, there wasn't electricity and there wasn't a bank and there was no digital means, even phones in my village. So I used to receive money. And then when I left and came as a student to the US, I used to send a part of the money back home to my brother and to my father so that my brother could go to school and my father could then support the family, including sending my younger sister to school and health expenses for my mother and everyone else and my nephews. Yes, I have a lot of experience.
And Ruben, you do as well.
I do. I mean, I emigrated to the United States back in 2000. Then my career took me to Spain for 5 years and then to Singapore for 5 years. And what I learned is that, I mean, the remittances business is very fragmented and there is not a single economic model. Pricing fluctuates from country to country. There is a lot of FX issue. And if you are on bank trying to send money, it's even more expensive for you. So I was going from supermarkets to branch networks to, small remitters in small markets just to send money back to El Salvador, where I'm originally from. Sending money back to my mother for similar expenses, food, utilities, education for my brothers, etc., etc. So that was the case. But I'm not a single case. There are 200 million individuals like myself or that are sending money to 800 million individuals in their home country. Is a massive, economic load for economies, no?
As you're talking about this, I just want to put up a graphic right now that shows the top 5 recipient countries in 2021. India, Mexico, China, Philippines, Egypt, which you can look at those numbers and look at that map, and it really tells you a story about remittance and migration trends. And I want to get to that in a second, but first I want to build upon something you were saying, Ruben, which is the expense of these remittances, right? You can send $200 and have to pay $12 in fees. That is crazy, right? And really a hardship for people. And so what's happening here? Why are the fees so high?
Well, the main reason is distribution channels. What I learned is, it's very hard and for these companies to develop, a better pricing or better solutions if they are depending on physical distribution. Or remember that most of this network born as a cash-to-cash network. And it's very expensive to manage cash. It's very expensive to develop the secure infrastructure to accept cash and to disburse cash in the other location. I'm happy to see that, big players like Western Union, MoneyGram, Remitly, they are all making significant changes in the way they operate their business, and they are migrating a significant portion of the business to digital. I believe the study from the World Bank says that the cost of sending $200, in average, is like 6.6%. If the transaction happens in cash to cash, it's 6.5%. If one leg of the transaction happens in digital, is 4.8%, for example. We believe that end-to-end digital will reduce the cost to around 3-something%. And it's pretty much and that will create significant impact in the local economies, of course.
But then we go back to those numbers about how many people don't have internet access, right? And so in order for this all to happen, people need access. What responsibility, Dilip, does the private sector have in making that? So the UN set a goal. Actually, Ruben, I'll let you answer this first because you started on this. But the UN set a goal of 2030 to reduce those fees to 3%. What does setting a goal mean? Does that mean private sector has to follow that and reach that goal?
No, I think what it means is that the public and the private sector needs to address the problem holistically. I don't think there is a single way to approach this issue, because you have installed infrastructure, you have a cash-to-cash network already operating and managing these, very large flows, and the evolution to digital will take some time. Sometimes in the development countries, you will have, immediate access to a digital tool, but in the receiving side, you will not have it. Today, we announced that we're making an agreement, a partnership with Tunes. Tunes is a B2B payment platform based in Singapore that is connected to 78 mobile wallets around the world, in 44 markets. And why we're doing this is because we know that even though Visa Direct, which is the money movement platform for Visa, has the ability to send to cards and send to bank accounts, there are many individuals who don't have access to a card or to a bank account. Yeah. But these mobile wallets are becoming a very important financial tools for them. So in order to reach them, we need to go to the tool, to the digital access they have today. And that will help to bridge the gap between banking access in development countries and underserved or unbanked situations in emerging markets.
I want to put a face to this because we can talk about this big picture, but these are real people, right? And GZERO produced a series of videos about the issues we're discussing. And so I want to share a clip from a woman named Karina from Puebla, Mexico, about the challenges that she's faced getting remittances.
Mi nombre es Karina Rodríguez Rodríguez, soy del estado de Tlaxcala. del municipio de San Francisco Teclanoca. Mi esposo se llama Roberto Atriano Rodríguez. Pues cuando tomó la decisión de venirse, pues sí fue duro, porque pues yo dije, tengo dos hijos, pero pues también doy gracias a Dios porque pues gracias a que mi esposo estuvo aquí en Estados Unidos y que él pudo trabajar y que él nos mandaba dinero, con el dinero que él nos mandaba pues iba yo juntando, pude construir mi casa, cumplir, pues a lo mejor no todo como el sueño que mis hijos anhelaban o que mi esposo anhelaba para ellos. Pues sí, es difícil o se le dificultaba mandar las remesas para nosotros por lo mismo. Una, porque no tenía como cuenta, a lo mejor igual no tenía un teléfono propio, ¿no? ¿Por qué? Porque pues decía, mira, no tengo un buen trabajo, tus hermanas me prestan el teléfono. El recibir las remesas ahí en mi pueblo, pues sí es algo difícil, porque uno no cuenta con una cuenta en el banco. A veces tenemos que pagar seguros. Yo a veces hasta me peleaba porque decía, si apenas pagué un seguro, ¿y cómo es posible que nuevamente voy a pagar otro seguro? Entonces igual a veces me iba yo a hacer 2 horas y medias en el banco para que yo pudiera cobrar esas remesas.
You know, again, we talk about these big numbers, 3.7 billion, 1.4 billion, but it really brings it home when you actually hear somebody's story. And DLIP, her story is similar to so many people's. There are a myriad of issues that people face, correct?
Absolutely. Sending, just being able to send money, one has to travel far, face the hardships, whether it is in terms of standing in a line for a long time. Well, you hear the story of people in the Gulf region, there are lots of migrants. As a share of population, there are lots of migrants in places like Dubai. In Dubai, 96% or 94% of the population is migrant workers. So you can imagine all these people, and they had a Sunday to go to send money home or a Friday, and they have to stand in line, and it takes a day to be just able to send their own money to their people, right? At this time when we can have this conversation instantly and almost costlessly, almost. Besides that, the inconvenience, the cost itself, as Ruben pointed out, on average, it costs more than 6%. For smaller amounts and poorer people, the cost can be even higher. For example, sending money to Africa can be 8% or more. And I had one experience once. I checked sending money from Benin to India. I happened to be in Benin. At that time, it was 30%. That was about a decade ago. But you have the currency exchange fee on the origin end, and then on the beneficiary end, another currency exchange fee. And then you have the fees to be collected by the origin agent, and then the transmission agent, and the beneficiary agent, the one which is distributing. So it can be more than double digit in terms of costs. So yes, it is a huge issue. And when you look at countries like, let's say, we talked about El Salvador a bit, where Ruben is from, 30% of their national income is remittances. In Lebanon, 54%, more than half of the economy is actually remittances. So in these economies, remittances are a true financial lifeline to people, and it is even more so for very poor people. And we're talking about billions of people, right, who benefit from this. So you can imagine if there is a 6% or higher cost to that on a volume of more than 600 billion or maybe closer to $1 trillion, you are looking at actually 60 million or so just going for fees. That is double the size of total official aid provided by the US and double the size of all official aid received by Sub-Saharan Africa.
Dilip, thank you for bringing that up. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ruben, thank you so much. You still stick around, please, because I want to bring you back again. Thanks, both of you, for that conversation. And I'm so glad that Dilip brought that up, too, because I think we went from the personal, and then when you bring it back to the macro to see what effect that has on a country, right? If you're looking at those top 5 countries receiving remittances and those incredibly high fees, and then people not having access to digital tools so that the fees can go lower, what does that do to the economy of an entire country? I want now to turn to a new topic, the importance of expanding access to digital banking, which we talked about, but payment options and trade. Let's welcome our next guest. Kati Suominen is founder and CEO of Next Trade Group, and Usman Ahmed is the head of public affairs and strategic research at PayPal. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for having us.
So it's great to see you both. Katya, I want to discuss trade with you specifically in a few moments. You wrote a whole book on it, but I want to start on the larger issue of inclusion, which we've been talking about in the digital banking and payment world. We've seen a lot of growth in 2020, but so many communities are still left out. And what impact from your perspective does that have on the global economy?
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, I think the prior panel has also discussed this very much, that digital payments and digital banking are really the launching pad for people and companies around the world into the digital economy, and furthermore into the global economy. So what we have found in our work is that businesses and entrepreneurs that are using digital payments are then able to progress thanks to that usage, to using what Ruben was talking about, digital platforms, e-commerce, and through that, they are able to start to export and reach markets and customers that they didn't have before. And then through that, of course, start to grow, hire more people, contract more services in their local economy. So, and furthermore, when you have access to digital banking or digital payments, you're able to access finance, and that enables you then to grow your business further, have better cash flow that further enables you to fulfill orders from around the world and so forth. So we see these cascading effects from digital payments and digital access that come afterward, whether it has to do with access to markets, access to new customers, your growth of your profit margins, your exports, and then furthermore, the access to finance. That, of course, is a kind of positive virtuous cycle.
Absolutely. Usman, digital payments increased greatly. We talked about that during the pandemic, especially in developing countries. 57% of adults there now make or receive digital payments. But boy, even though that's up from 35% in 2014, it's still only 57%. And we've heard of the implications about that. So from your landscape, sort of the center of digital payments, give us your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for inviting me to this important conversation with economic and political. I really appreciate how you're bringing in all these different lenses. Payments is really a two-sided network, two-sided platform. And I think we started now talking about both of them, where Ruben and Dilip and Ali really did a great job of bringing in the consumer side, where you have seen this acceleration. Ruben said it well, 3 to 5 years of kind of growth in a secular trend. There was already digitization happening, but it was accelerated tremendously through the pandemic. And I really appreciated that we're talking about not only the cost benefits of that digitization in terms of lower costs, but also the time benefits. We did a study where we showed that people who were sending remittances were saving 15 days of their life. That's how much time they're spending standing in line, waiting, let alone the security issues of handling cash. JJ talked about, women and, having to carry large amounts of cash. Not a particularly effective, safe kind of environment. And that's really the opportunity that digital payments provides as well. But the opportunity on the business side, you mentioned kind of the acceleration of adoption in emerging markets. The business side and the small business side that Kati started to hit on is probably, macroeconomically what might be most exciting about this trend, because traditionally large businesses have been using digital payments for a long time. This acceleration that you mentioned, that still has a long way to go. A lot of that has been taking place in the small business segment. And what we see through our data is that when businesses go online and start selling, they see 3x the sales that they had. If they sell cross-border, they see 4x the sales that they have. And that's really the opportunity that I think is most unique about what's going on in the digital payments environment right now, is the ability to reach. You mentioned 4 billion people access the internet. Data shows that about 2 billion of those people have bought something online in the last 12 months. Data also shows that over 50% of them, so about 1 billion people, have bought something online from another country in the last 12 months. So no matter what country you live in, how many people you've got walking by your store, there's no comparison to what a small business is able to access now with the digital environment, with digital payment tools. And that's really the exciting trend that we're trying to lean into, facilitate, and understand more.
I want once again to bring a face to this issue that we're talking about. And so again, GZERO produced a video series and they spoke to a young woman named Tulsi Ranier, a journalist in Nepal. And here's some of what she had to say.
When the pandemic hit in early 2020 in Nepal, that's where you could see changes happening in the way people were doing things. And touch was a really big thing then. People were taking a lot of precautions in how they wanted to avoid the virus and avoid physical touch. And that's when I think eSeva, PhonePe, and all these online payment transactions, they took the lead and they promoted themselves as something that could, exclude that touch from transactions that were happening. And online shopping took over Nepal as well, which was not really the case before 2017, 2018.
Kati, it's incredibly apparent, the correlation between digitization and economic growth, right? Everyone has talked about it so far on this panel and on this show. So what is the holdup? Presumably there's a big economic opportunity out there, which Usman, you all are taking advantage of. There's definitely a social opportunity. There's political, economic, everything. Why is it taking so long? Why do so many people not have this yet?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not only correlation, I think it's also causation, as the others have pointed out, that once people are able to access the formal economy or even digital payments, even if they're not formal yet, they are able to access these various benefits that come from it, from access to new customers and finance and so forth. And then, of course, indirectly, this holds up. The lack of access holds up everybody else because we have these network effects that Usman also was referring to. Well, I guess, some of the challenges have to do with financial literacy and education. We have found that, and IMF studies have also found that countries where digital payments have taken off, people have certain level of digital literacy. They have certain trust also in formal financial entities and so on. So there are certain other variables that need to go right as well for people to kind of opt into the formal financial services or in new digital payment tools. So there's quite a lot of education to be done. And then I would point out also that once people use certain financial tools, there needs to be more interoperability. I think governments and businesses have some ways to go also to promote the interoperability among the different digital tools so that people are able to access these network benefits that come with access to multiple networks of tools and services.
So interesting, Kati. When I was younger, I spent my first summer working in microfinance in India, and I thought, this is it. This is going to change everything, right? This is the only thing we need. It's the silver bullet. I was so taken by the idea of it. And I remember after my second week, the general manager sat me down and he said, look, that will get us here, right? But you need education and you need childcare and you need all of these things at once, which is what you were talking about. And so it really needs to be a partnership between private sector, public sector, NGOs, et cetera. Usman, we've talked a lot about digital payments and the video talked about a woman who's hardly carrying cash anymore. Are there any potential downsides to a cashless economy?
So I don't know about downsides from an individual basis, right? Because I think it's hard to argue that the physical pieces of paper are better than what the digital technology enables you to have from both the kind of core payment itself, but also one of the key things about digitizing the payment is that it then allows all sorts of other financial services to be created around it. So credit, you talk about access to finance. It's very hard to assess somebody's financial capabilities on the small business side if you don't really know what their payments look like. But if you do, then all of a sudden you get a much better ability to do it. But To your question, instead of maybe downsides, I might talk about challenges, because I definitely do think there are challenges, and I think Kati mentioned a few of them. To your point about access to finance, that would be on that list. It's a $4 trillion gap that small businesses face around the world for access to finance, and if we want them to digitize, sometimes it's a constant process of digitization. It's not just like you do it once and then that's it. Providing access to finance, providing government support for digitization, I think are really, really important things that can go a long way. The other thing I'd note, and I want to be as balanced as I can, there are security and privacy challenges in the digital environment that we need to think carefully about. And, I mentioned there are definitely security challenges in the cash environment as well. Platforms like PayPal, they do something called tokenization, which is to kind of mask sensitive financial information and enable people to do payments in a secure and private way. Visa and others do that as well. Kind of leaning into some of those trends and figuring out how to solve some of those issues, I think, is core. And then I'll end with the notion that I think Kati and others on the call have talked about a bit, that, and JJ, you stated it so well, it is a holistic set of issues. From I'll add identity to the list, broadband access, you talk about access to finance, digital literacy, financial literacy. There's a whole range of these things. And the other thing I'd put on the table is nobody's going to solve it on their own, not an individual company, not an individual government, it not only has to be all these entities, it has to be all of them working together, solving the unique problems that they're best situated to solve. I think that is the silver bullet. It's not a silver bullet, right? It's a whole range of factors that need to come together on this.
Usman, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for tackling this problem. It's big and it's important, and we really appreciate your thoughts on it. Thanks so much. Kati, you stay with me for a moment. Thanks, Usman. All right, I want to spend a few minutes now with Kati, specifically discussing trade and why access to digital trade is vital to small businesses around the world, as we just started talking about. Kati, it is no surprise that most small business saw a significant revenue reduction during the pandemic. And most of that loss, or much of it, was due to lack of foot traffic. But in what ways has digitalization affected businesses since 2020?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Ruben also started to discuss exactly this. What we see in some of the data that we've run is that companies that were ready before COVID, that were already digitized, that had some way to transact with customers that was not physical or in store, did better. Nobody did very well during COVID. When you think of companies that are brick and mortar retailers, for instance, but those that were digitized, that were prepared, did better. And subsequently, I think companies around the world have really realized that they need to accelerate their digitization. And we fast forwarded, as Ruben also mentioned, 5 years within a year or two, and companies set up digital transacting capabilities, remote transactions, digital payments, as well as started their own online stores, got on regional marketplaces that have been taking off around the world. We have some really large marketplaces in Latin America and Africa, certainly in Southeast Asia, that have taken off, and companies are now onboarding those en masse. So I would say, we see rates like 30-40% of small businesses using these marketplaces to reach customers. And furthermore, then some of the better companies, some of the larger ones are using global marketplaces, say Amazon, eBay, and others to reach international customers. So companies have really kind of accelerated this journey that Usman was talking about. It's not just a one-shot digitization, and you start typically from payments, and then using social media, and then you graduate up, and that journey is highly correlated with companies' export participation, accessing new international markets. So I think there's been a really great story, definitely a very thick silver lining, if you want, from COVID in terms of businesses digitization.
You wrote a book in 2019. You could not have expected what would happen after that. It was called Revolutionizing World Trade, and it discussed about the many ways emerging technologies would bolster globalization in the coming decade. Now we see, because of the pandemic, as you said, some things were accelerated, but compared to what you thought then, Where do you think the world is right now in terms of those goals?
Yeah, good question. I thought I've been trade economist and looked at trade issues for a long time, and we know that there are great inefficiencies in the international trading system. When you very concretely think about moving a container from point A to point B in the global economy, there's a lot of inefficiencies, paper, kind of physical handshakes that could be digitized in the process among the many players that move cargo, and certainly in the payments, in the transactions between exporters and importers, also big trust issues and so on. And technologies have a great opportunity to solve for some of these challenges. And in COVID, we actually had in international trade also an acceleration of digitization of these various elements of international trade. So countries' customs, border agencies adopted much more digital processes, digitize some of the paper documents that are particularly a hindrance for small businesses when they have to fill out so many different compliance documents to access new markets. And this was a fantastic trend, particularly in Latin America, East Asia, as well as to an extent in Sub-Saharan Africa, this paperless trade, if you want, accelerated as well. The second big change, I think, was the rise of all kinds of technology-enabled logistics services. So you may think of kind of digital freight forwarders, digital freight exchanges that enable companies to book logistics providers, last mile delivery services of various kinds that are very data-driven, route optimization, using these kinds of technologies that enable them to never travel without cargo and streamline their operations. And then, of course, we have drone delivery, new delivery systems, autonomous delivery, drone delivery, that also facilitate transactions, whether it's across borders or in cities and at the last mile or the final 50 feet, as it's called. So end-to-end trade has become much easier. And then finally, I think like ports, all these hubs of global trade, international ports, free trade zones, where there are a lot of different transactions between different parties that used to be very manual and paper-based, where people stand in lines and pay in cash, have also started to emphasize digitization, even in the developing world, certainly in the advanced world, where we have some large ports like say, the Port of Rotterdam adopting a long time ago already leading technologies, Internet of Things to monitor different assets and coordinate assets, blockchain technologies to trace the products through the port and so forth. So I think there's been a similar acceleration in international trade. And I hope that for customs and governments, the kind of paperless trade trend is not going back now that we're emerging from COVID, that we continue plowing forward.
You brought it up in just a sentence, and we could have an entire hour on this, but I am very excited to watch how blockchain technology changes all of this in terms of trust and tracking, et cetera. Okay, when we talk about small businesses, what are the biggest roadblocks right now when it comes to small businesses entering the global market?
Yeah, it's interesting. One would think kind of naturally that it's about market access challenges, all these paper that they have to fill out, or the compliance that they have to do, and that's a part of it. But what we have seen through our work is that the primary concerns for small businesses to access global markets and use particularly digital tools and e-commerce is doing all the digital work, is doing digital marketing, maintaining their presence on marketplaces, learning how to present themselves and compete in the digital economy. So it's really is about these nuts and bolts of sales and marketing in the digital era that enable them then to stand out and market to new customers. Of course, then there are challenges with cross-border logistics, partly because of inefficiencies in customs, particularly in developing world, and just small businesses sending small packages that cost a lot to send instead of businesses sending in bulk. And I think technology companies are solving for these challenges and enabling companies to reduce the logistics cost. I think we're solving bit by bit for this. And then there are challenges in terms of trade finance, precisely because of the challenges that we discussed, that small businesses are not even able to access bank accounts or credit from banks. And oftentimes for trade finance, the bar is even higher for small businesses to access, say, working capital for their exports. Their bank doesn't necessarily understand international trade and so on. So these are very global challenges, also happen a lot in the US. So I would say kind of digital marketing, logistics, and finance are themes that keep coming up all the time for small businesses.
Yeah, and I covered small business for NBC News for over a decade, and really it's the same things that we've always been saying, and it comes down to a lot of time to be able to learn things, education, money, right, and being able to hire people who are experts, et cetera. And so these are challenges that everyone faces. This last issue that I want to talk about is one that has a particularly large impact on women. So about a third of small businesses are owned by women, but only 15% of those export their goods or services. Why does this matter? If you can explain it in sort of big picture, and how do we fix this?
Yeah, first of all, just to say that the 15% is not necessarily unique to women. There's men-led businesses as well, don't typically export. Very, minorities of them export. And if we see a discrepancy between women and men in export participation, it's oftentimes because women-led firms are smaller on average than men-led firms, and it is smaller companies that are less likely to export. So it's not because they are women, it's because they are just smaller. But we have seen now during COVID is that women have really around the world entered into business, started their own businesses globally. And in every country that we've studied, we actually did a study on this with Visa. And every country that we looked at, women-led firms are now a larger share than ever before of all companies that have been formed. So there's more and more women-led firms entering the economy, which is a good thing. And then, I think a lot of women, particularly in the US, as we looked at US companies, are run by minorities and younger women as well, that are oftentimes more digitally savvy. And the minority-led women firms are also likelier to export than traditional women-led firms. So I think there's great opportunities coming if these new women-led firms are able to access all these digital tools and services, if they are able to access credit as well for their growth, and furthermore, if they are able to then leverage all these digital tools like e-commerce and marketplaces to grow their exports. What we have seen is that these women-led firms that are able to use e-commerce oftentimes outperform men-led firms that are similar size, similar geography, and are able to access new customers, new markets, even better than men-led firms. So there's a big trend of female entrepreneurship around the world, and we have some work to do to translate that into trade and export opportunities, but it's definitely the elements are there.
All right, I like that we're heading in the right direction. Thank you so much, Kati. In our remaining few moments, I want to bring back Ollie Wine of Eurasia Group and Ruben Salazar from Visa to join Kati. We've had a broad and I would say fantastic conversation today. Thank you to all of you. And we could spend hours on any of the facets we've covered, but the overriding theme has been about how greater digital inclusion can lift both individuals and economies. So I want to give each of you a chance to offer some closing thoughts from your perspectives, geopolitics, private sector, global policy. What do you hope viewers to take away? Ali, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, JJ. So I was frantically taking notes the entire time because it was such a rich conversation. So just a few takeaways. First, I found Ruben's story and Dilip's story very, very compelling, and I think it's important, first of all, that when we have these discussions about inclusion and we inclusion in the abstract, that we remember that we're talking about individuals, human lives, human stories. So I think just remembering sort of the narratives and those very compelling videos that GZERO prepare that we've played. So just remembering the human element. I really like Kati's point about what she calls the cascading effects from digital access. Just when you have digital access, when the global economy is becoming increasingly digitized, just the extent of empowerment that's achieved, the sequence of empowerment that's unlocked when you are able to become increasingly digitized, participate in an increasingly digitized economy. So I really like Kati's emphasis on cascading effects from greater digital access. I really like Guzman's point that when we talk about enhanced digital access, which has been, I think, a major focal point of our conversation this morning, that we don't forget that digital access, even as we enhance digital access, we have to think about it and mesh it within a much broader set of issues. So enhancing financial literacy, enhancing security around digital payments, increasing trust in financial institutions. So it's not just about enhancing digital access or enhancing access to banking. There's a much broader constellation of issues that we need to be considering. And then the last point, we've talked about how various communities that are disenfranchised, various communities that we need to empower as we go forward. And we talked about how women are uniquely marginalized in terms of access to banking, access to digitization. And there was a study that McKinsey Global Institute put out that I just want to flag here. They put out a study in 2015 talking about the impacts that we could see if women were given equal labor force participation with men, or even if, just region by region, if countries in a given region performed as well as the best performing country in the region in terms of gender parity. And the conclusion of the 2015 McKinsey study was, if you look at that regional approach, we could add about $12 trillion to the global economy by 2025. And if we achieve true gender parity between women and men in labor force participation, we could add $28 trillion to the global economy by 2025. So really thinking about all the ways in which we can enhance women's empowerment, women's access, stimulate women's entrepreneurship. So those are a few of my takeaways. I could list many more, but those were a few that I wanted to flag just before closing.
Thank you so much, Ali. And to be clear, I was not telling you to be quiet, but rather the dog. All right, Ruben, you're up. Some takeaways from today.
Yeah, no, listen, during the last decade or so, Visa and many other partners has been talking about this concept of financial inclusion. And we have made commitments to bring more and more individuals to formal banking ecosystems. But we do believe that equally important is to start talking about digital inclusion. We do believe that digital adoption will redefine poverty lines, will really support a more inclusive communities, and will create an important economic impact in the GDPs of every nation. We are absolutely convinced about that. But we also understand that in order to achieve this, it will require a significant collaboration between the public and the private sector, and recognizing that not everybody has the skills, the assets, or all the capabilities to solve for this gigantic problem we have. It is an opportunity for the entire industry to collaborate and partner in solving these major issues. And it will require a lot of dialogue. So I'm happy to see GZERO sparking and promoting this type of conversation, because that's the way we need to start. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ruben. And Kati, you've got the last word.
Well, thanks so much. Everything great has already been said, but to add a little bit, I think, to echo others, we really have a historic opportunity here in front of us now that digitization has accelerated as a result of COVID, and businesses are ready to invest in their digital journeys around the world. And we need to now take the next, go to the next level if you want. I think in baseball terms, we're kind of in the second inning only. This is just the beginning of the journey, and governments need to help out by supporting a more enabling environment for policies that enable this trend, and also enable policies that are more convergent around the world, so that companies have easier time navigating all these new digital regulations that are emerging as well as a result of the digital revolution. We need to focus on this interoperability among different digital platforms and services, not only policies, so that companies are able to take full advantage of all these tools and platforms that are emerging. And we harness these synergies in the digital ecosystem. And then finally, to echo what Ruben was saying, these public-private partnerships are very important. Public sector plays an important role as a regulator. Development agencies can help particularly companies to act the kind of last mile and support the broader development gains. And companies, of course, bring tremendous expertise, technologies, knowledge to unlock markets and create new markets. So I think public and private sector have a great role to work together in these kinds of partnerships. And this, as Ruben mentioned, this dialogue is one. and then actual partnerships where we operationalize projects and initiatives together to connect the last mile, to enable that access for those that are not yet connected, and also to accelerate the journeys of those that are already on the way is really a critical element here.
Ali Wine, Ruben Salazar, Kati Suominen, thank you so much for your insights, your time, and the work you're doing to solve these big global issues. To see more content from GZERO's series Closing the Gap, head to the URL you see below. On behalf of GZERO Media, I want to thank you all for watching. I'm JJ Ramberg, and have a great day.